Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another uLaw webinar. In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the readiness for a law society audit and how you can be proactively prepared and how you should plan for such an audit. Not if you are scheduled to have one, but just how can you just be prepared for it from day one. And we're going to talk about the audit requirements, and we'll also talk about the measures that you can take as a legal professional to be well prepared and ready for these audits. Okay. Once again, this webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. So it's 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in Ontario and British Columbia as well. So our legal friends joining us from these jurisdictions, kindly do use your appropriate portals to log in your 1 hour of credits. Okay, again, 1 hour of CPD for professionalism credits. Fantastic. So let's get going. Once again, request you to kindly mute your phone lines and do use the chat window to ask any questions. We've certainly improved, we think, on the quality of the audio. If you are having a bit of an issue, we highly recommend that you use your phone line to dial in instead of using the computer. Okay? Perfect. So every uLaw webinar has an agenda, and today's webinar has an agenda as well. And the core aspects of what we're going to talk about in this webinar in the next 1 hour is about the audit process itself. What is the audit process, and how do you prepare for an audit? You know, both as a way of reacting to a scheduled audit or proactively by design as part of a legal firm, just have that readiness from day one. We'll talk about both and the benefits of the latter. Practice review, we'll specifically talk about the components of an audit, so including the practice review, which is the methodologies, the process, the ways of means of recording and how you're ready for that. A financial review, this is one of the key areas that you're being audited for, and these are all the books and record keeping of your business, of your legal side of the business, including trust documents, so you have ledgers, journals, and then you have your general, not just the journals and ledgers, you have fee books, expense books, disbursements books as well. Then you have procedural documentation based on the jurisdiction. For example, in Ontario, you're required to fill out a Form 9A every time that you do a trust transfer from a trust account into a general account. Okay, it's required to fill that Form 9A, and we'll talk about that, deposit slips, etc. And then we'll look after practice review and financial review being one of the more serious components of the review, which auditors most certainly do look with a magnifying glass and want to ensure that you're doing the right thing, especially with trust money and all the documents that surround and extend that. And we'll jump into looking at a technology review. So in terms of an audit, you may be asked a question about, as a legal professional in today's business, how do you manage your backup recovery? How do you manage access to information or data about your clients? I mean, do you bring the type of professionalism to be able to provide access to information to both your clients and for yourself from multiple devices? So we'll talk about a technology review as well. That's a component of the audit. Obviously, there is the professional rules of conduct review. You know, obviously, we've seen in Ontario, they've included the whole surveying of a law firm that can happen to really understand the life in a law firm. After a series of incidents that have occurred in the last few months, they've now included that survey as a big part of the professional conduct review. And we'll talk about how using practice management and legal accounting software can truly audit-proof yourself around the practice, financial, and the technology reviews as well. Okay? Okay. So moving along, what is really an audit? And, the popular question is, why me? And I believe the question is more or less, what is the audit? And the answer is it's always going to be at some point in time. we've heard that all new practitioners within the first 12 to 18 months of their starting a practice are bound to be audited. So if you're someone who's brand new to this business, then you most definitely should prepare for that inevitable audit. But more than be prepared, be really, I would say, enthusiastic by plan to really be, to really take pride and show off, in a lack of a better way to say that, to take pride in the preparation that you have done to provide all those audit readiness documents and checklists that really makes you look good in front of your auditor, right? And then that goes a long way in not only establishing your firm as a very reputable, audit-proof firm, but internally within your firm, even if you're a solo practitioner, even for yourself, it's a major boost to know that you're doing everything as per what's required. And if you've built it as a process from day one, then in a very subconscious way, you know that you're going to be audit ready at any given time. Okay, so what is the purpose? That really the audit supports and promotes very high quality law firm record keeping, right? That's the bottom line. By answering questions and providing guidance regarding, whatever the work that you do, private mortgages, trust and general record keeping, etc., right? Ensuring compliance with the Law Society's requirements through these audits. So the Law Society, based on the rules of the different jurisdictions, Ontario, British Columbia, other parts of Canada, Alberta, the Atlantic provinces, right? So depending on your individual jurisdictions, policies, and I would say Law Society guidelines, which you can easily Google, or you can go to your Law Society's website and download, and then really understand that. What we've done at uLaw is really looked at all Law Society guidelines and not only infused it into all the product documentation in the product, we've also given you a checklist that you can always refer to if you want to understand if you're on track. Okay? And to the question of why me, as I mentioned, it's designed to be a very proactive compliance measurement and a bit of a problem detection tool. So for whatever reason, if you're not using the right tools, right, and for some reason you really didn't learn all of these basic concepts in your college or university, then there has to be a way that in a very constructive way you're told what you're doing wrong, right? So the audit obviously is also an opportunity for you to have that constructive criticism, and sometimes spot audits also measure the integrity of the law firm's financial filing. They assess ongoing compliance and, very importantly, the financial record keeping. Okay? And what happens is, as part of that audit, let's say for whatever reason, if you're not using the right tools to capture data appropriately, there's a bit of confusion around your general ledgers, trust ledgers, and bookkeeping, then the auditors would give you an opportunity where they would say, we'll come back after a certain period of time, and they would expect you to get your books in order, or they would probably provide you with some feedback that you should consider as part of your next audit. And they would certainly, depending on the severity of, how poorly or how badly you've kept your books, the time for the second audit actually would reduce, right? So if you've not done a great job, then they'll probably come back faster to ensure that you're not making that same mistake. So the bigger question is, what am I being audited for? So it's not so much why me, because let's take that as a given that you are going to be audited. The better question, the more important question to ask is, what am I being audited on? So having reviewed the audit guidelines, I'll walk you through the checklist as well, just as a presentation, just so you understand the core components of that review. We've broken it down into 4 major components. So you've got your practice review, your financial review, your technology review, and professional conduct and time management review. Okay, so we've kind of tried to give it a little bit of a definition. So if you look at a practice review, it's everything to do with the company's ability to manage clients, matters, and procedures as per the guidelines. So are you doing the appropriate intake? Are you ensuring there's a conflict screening that's done for every client that you intake? Are you looking to provide a retainer letter that's as detailed as required so that your clients are not left in doubt about the engagement policies that govern your relationship with your client, right? So are you providing the timely invoices that are required? Are you having a proper matter management component to it? Are you able to easily search for files? So those are all part of your practice review, okay? And then comes the financial review, which is truly about the bookkeeping and the record keeping of dollars and money. And if you are in the business of dealing with trust money, where you're accepting retainers and money in advance, then even more the importance of you to manage those dollars as well. So we're looking at trust ledgers and bookkeeping journals as per the requirements of the bookkeeping guidelines. And we'll talk about those checklists, and we'll talk about every component as we walk through the presentation. Then comes the technology review. We've seen where auditors often do ask the firm about the safety measures that they take to protect, kind of really protect themselves from any technology failures. This does not necessarily lead itself only to cloud-based. So if you do have a homegrown system or a manual system, you manage all your practice through Excel sheets and Word documents, and if you're storing it all in that laptop of yours, which is great, but then do you have a measure for ensuring that that laptop, if stolen, people aren't able to retrieve all that information? Two, if something were to happen to that PC or that machine, or if you have a desktop solution, what happens if the data is corrupted? If you have a fire, what happens when the data is lost? How do you recover? All those are part of the technology review, so that they're asking so that they understand how well prepared you are to position yourself as a legal professional and a business owner. Okay. Then obviously are the professional conducts as well as the time management reviews. Is the firm taking the appropriate steps to keep high standards of professional rules of conduct, and how do you manage time, right? Time management also becomes a critical component, to ensure that you're providing the appropriate time for your clients. You're not late to court meetings. You're keeping a good way of tracking all of that information as well. So time management is not just internal time management of the firm, it's through that time management of that firm, how are you providing a level of service quality to the community, okay? Because that eventually reflects on the legal industry itself, on the profession itself, if you will, okay? And our bottom line, and the way we like for you to think about it, is you need to be thinking about the audit every day and build a compliance into the DNA of the firm's daily execution. So make it a process maybe to say you're not going to take an intake without, let's say, a source of contact, because that's a critical component of a documentation that's sometimes asked in the review. Ensure that you're not going to open a matter for a client without doing the conflict screening. Okay? Unless you do the conflict screening, either yourself or anyone else in the firm is not going to open a file. So there's checklists that you can actually schedule for yourself, for your firm, to have that discipline and have that as part of the DNA, so that it's all leading up to a very compliant life cycle. Okay? And another question, how do I prepare for an audit? And what does it take to be a very audit-ready legal firm? Okay? Obviously, at a very high level, we've seen this example if I were to just break it down as two ways. There's one, which is the most reactive way, the most common way we've seen legal professionals deal with audit is a reactive way. They get a letter from the Law Society that they're going to be audited, and then they react to that situation. Okay? And they're like, okay, I'm willing to spend as much money as required. I'm willing to get as much as help required. Let me just get through this review. The other side of the house, and we're starting to see that as a trend, and that's something we're promoting, is having the confidence and swag, if you will, to really have, by design, by day one, the process, and as I mentioned, discipline and clarity of process of execution that all leads up towards a compliant life cycle throughout all stages of the legal firm, right? Right from client intake to closure to doing your monthly reconciliations. The legal firm pretty much has a workflow, if you will, that allows you to just do it in a very structural way. That's all designed towards keeping up to the standards and the expectations of the Law Society's audit requirements. Okay? And what we want to believe is the audits are not necessarily designed to scare you. Yes, maybe in a very constructive criticism way, catch you, not necessarily catch you on the wrong foot, but if you are making mistakes, obviously be that body that were to review it and give you feedback on what you should and how you can take corrective measures to get it back on track, right? But as I said, they're really designed to find issues and correct them early rather than having to deal with it, over a period of a couple of years or 3 years or 4 years, where there's a lot of catching up then that's required. Time and money is then involved as well. So the question that we want to ask as a provider of legal accounting and practice management is, why not start this from day one? Knowing that you're going to be audited at some time in your career, and for some of the new practitioners, most certainly within the first 12, 18 months of your career, why not start that from day one and do it every day? And trust me, it's not as hard as it seems. Just doing just like how you talk about John Tash and having a discipline, it takes 21 days to get a discipline. It's just one other thing to build a discipline around how you deal with things in the law firm. And if it can all be designed towards keeping up the compliance rules, then from day one, you're pretty much working towards that, right? So reviewing of practice procedures on a regular basis, something that you would have to write into your DNA, right? On a quarterly basis. Review the financial statements on a weekly, monthly, and a yearly basis. And what we like to suggest, as I mentioned earlier, is really starting with the checklist. So create yourself a checklist, that has a timely fashion to it. So there are certain checklists that are more bound to be done on a weekly basis. There are others that are more prone towards a quarterly or a yearly basis, okay? So obviously you want to keep a tab on your trust account and generate those ledgers and journals if possible. On a more weekly and monthly basis. For example, you have your trust reconciliation statements, where the Law Society recommends that to be done on a monthly basis, okay? At the end of every month, kind of reconcile your trust account and your general account. So if you look at some examples here, weekly bank accounts validation, review all your bank transactions. And why do we recommend that? Sometimes what happens is that banks, depending on who you deal with, may either deposit money into your trust account or may withdraw money from your trust account, neither of which they should have done in the first place. But if you're reviewing it on a weekly basis, at least, there are clients of ours who do it on a daily basis, but if you're reviewing it on a weekly basis, then you have the opportunity to catch those errors early before you do your reconciliation. So for by mistake, if the bank did withdraw $5 as a service fee, you can always catch that early before the end of the month, go back to the bank and ask them to deposit that back into your trust account, which kind of nullifies that whole withdrawal. So, and then obviously ask them to withdraw that from your general account. But by doing that, then you're avoiding last-minute reconciliation issues, okay? Monthly financial checklist, I definitely mentioned about your reconciliation, then followed by your ledgers and journals, right? A quarterly practice management checklist, again, as an option. We're just providing this as options. You obviously are well prepared and should come up with a checklist that's more meaningful for your legal business based on the areas of practice and your style of execution. Some examples could be that of a client communication. Review your retainer letters, your engagement letters, even your invoices, review your interest rate. Are you charging, 10% or are you charging 18% per year? Again, that's based on how people are paying you, how you're following up to get paid, a lot of things, right? Think about how you're managing time. Are you in the business of doing a lot of POA where you're required to be in court a lot of time for these hearings, or if you're just doing, so it really comes down to your style, and as I said, the area of practice. A lot of these things differ based on that. Professional commitments, and last but not the least, any procedural documentation or process related to file management or matter management, okay? So, again, are you ensuring appropriate definition of or providing a description to a file? Are you able to store all the relevant documents and information within that file? Are you able to search for information faster, regardless of whether you're using a software or not? I want to talk in a very generic way. Even if you're doing this manually, you want to be able to have such a checklist. And on a yearly basis, obviously you want to look at the health of your business every year. You can do that on a quarterly basis too, but you can always compare yourself from one year to another and then look at your financial statements, your year-ends, etc. Okay? So bottom line from this slide, all we're trying to establish is to be ready for those audits. Let's start with a plan to have a checklist that's periodic that you can review and stay on top of. So let's talk, we spoke about those different reviews. So we'll talk about the practice management review checklist. Again, this is some suggestions that we're making based on, I would say, a superset of things that we know our clients have been asked in audits and what we've understood and read and the feedback that we've been provided by legal professionals. And these are obviously great, suggestions that we're trying to make for you to look at. So client service and communication, docketing, detailed note-taking process. We've covered this in many of our other webinars, but we'll talk again, specifically talking about client service and communications. Very important, dealing with those retainer letters, right? Ensuring that you have a process, whether it's yourself or others in your firm, where, especially if, let's say, you accept a cash retainer, you do know by the policy that within 24 hours, you need to deposit it into your trust account. So that needs to be educated, that needs to be part of a checklist, that needs to be part of a process that everybody can follow seamlessly with or without the core owner being available, right? Handling client fee complaints, procedures, what process do you have if, let's say, you generate an invoice, send it to your client, and the client says, you know what, this invoice is not clear enough for me, or is then negotiating a discount with you. He's saying, I can't offer, he or she is then coming back to you with a counter offer saying, this is not what we agreed upon, right? So how do you deal with conflicts? How do you deal with how you can negotiate with your client and ensuring that the engagement letters and all the documentation that you're signing off have the necessary, I would say, literature in it to ensure you're covered in all these different aspects of business. Letters of conclusions and handling of closure. So matter closure sometimes is overlooked. Many times we look at how we open a file, we do everything that has to be done, and then once we get the monies in, we pretty much leave it alone. We leave that matter alone. But the Law Society does talk exhaustively about how you close a matter, the necessary reasons to, not necessarily keep it open, close it, have it as a different tag, that your focus is always on open matters. Ensure that you're closing the matter with I would say, a closure letter which says, thank you for your business, dear client. This is how we engaged. This is everything that happened with the matter, and giving him a final list of all the financials, right? And last but not the least, we often talk about this, a non-engagement process as part of that client communication. Again, one of the things that's overlooked. Someone comes in, engages with you, and then before he or she can retain you, disappears. Then we talk about them being a ghost client. You still have to store their information. A client comes in, and then for whatever reason after the initial engagement, either you decide or the client decides to non-engage. What are the rules and procedures? So a checklist should consider a good majority of the practical scenarios that you may have to come across in each of those different types of reviews that we have. Okay, so this is a subset of things to consider as part of our checklist when it comes to practice management. Within the practice management, so we looked at client communication. Here's some examples of matter management and internal procedures. This slide and the entire session that we're doing today is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as well. So if you want to glance through these individually at your own leisure, by all means. But starting with a good file naming convention, right? Having individual file names and numbers for each matter and not for a client. So, for example, we often stress the necessary ways, even for a same client, having different file numbers so that you can easily identify each file by the nature of the scope of matter and the kind of work that you're doing, even if it's for the same client. So starting with a file naming convention that's meaningful, that's easy to search, easy to cross-index and retrieve, to ensuring that you have a statement of activity, including a settlement statement, very important, which really outlines every financial touch point and transaction that has occurred in that matter, right from the first retainer to a situation where you had to provide a refund on the retainer. Every touch point is well established in that settlement statement, okay? And everything in between, right, from organizing information to a proper, well-documented retainer letter that's, as exhaustive as required, that outlines nature of scope. Importantly, the fee structure, very, very important to stress upon the fee structure, because you don't want a loosely written retainer letter to come back and bite your back. Any expenses, or client expenses or disbursements that may occur based on the nature of the matter itself, and as last but not the least, what are the penalties? So really letting your client know through that documentation what the penalties are if certain conditions are not met. Okay? So we looked at client intake, we're talking about matter management, and we were asked this question, and we just quickly included this slide as part of this presentation about key components that should be in a retainer letter. Okay, so we thought we'll just add a slide so that, again, we'll reiterate it. I'm sure a lot of the individuals in this webinar today are well aware of this and are very seasoned legal professionals. But for the benefit of those who don't know that, we want to iterate that. Again, a retainer in a situation is a fee that's paid in advance. Especially in the legal business, you have the opportunity to accept advance pay, but obviously there are certain rules to how you manage that money. There are certain responsibilities that you as a legal professional have about how you manage that money. And a typical retainer letter should obviously capture the nature and scope of the work. Right? It's really talk about me, the lawyer, me, the paralegal, retain or is being retained by you, the Mr. Customer or Miss Customer, for this POA work or for the small claims matter, which is an issue with your neighbor, or a criminal charge because of a drunken drive, right? So really the nature and scope of the work needs to be well established. Most definitely document the client obligations. So obviously we'll talk about the obligations your firm has to this matter, but it's very important to also document and remember to document the client obligations. Signing off on retainer letters and sending it back on time. Ensuring that they pay your fees on time, right? If there's documentation that you require as part of the filing of the case or whatever it may be with regards to the matter, having a discipline, but the client needs to appreciate it and provide you with all the documentation in time, with its consequences too, if it's not done. Frequency of communication. So how often should your client expect information coming back from you, whether that's invoices or otherwise, all the types of communications, and the mode of communication, whether that's through mail, email, text, WhatsApp, whatever is the most convenient and the secure way, and whatever you agree upon with your client. A fee structure for providing the service, right? Your billable hours, or if you're providing a flat rate, or if you're providing a value pricing, such as a contingency, what that fee structure looks like. A termination clause, sometimes you could call it a non-engagement clause, what that looks like, right? And if you're going to be using any third-party consultants, this is something new that we encourage our clients to include in retainer letters, is just be honest and upfront about it, that if you are going to be using third-party agents, whether it's a stand-in or otherwise, letting your clients know about it, okay? And from confidentiality to even risks of modes of communication. All that can be part of that good sampled retainer letter. Okay. So we've looked at the initial review, which is really the practice management review, and two core components that we touched upon were client communication as well as file management. Okay, we see those are the two most commonly touched aspects of the review process in an audit from a practice management perspective. You're just making sure all the documentation is ready and you're all really ready to get a client in. Once you've established that, once you've documented it, once you've created a matter and you've got all these dollars coming in, then comes the next phase, which is how do you now manage and report all the financial information. If you're dealing with just the general account, then obviously you don't have to deal with trust and all the trust requirements. You still have to just deal with the general side of the house. But if you are a legal professional that's going to be covering both trust and general, then yes, you do have the additional obligation of having to deal with all the financial management checklists that encompass both the trust and the general side of the houses. Okay? Okay. Fee structure and handling a retainer is also equally important about how you manage your financial information. If you're doing billable hours, there's I would say, a structure to how you manage the money, right? So how often do you invoice? And if you're invoicing on a monthly basis, then obviously you should expect to have either trust transfers done on a monthly basis as part of your reconciliation, or if you're going to do it as a flat rate, then considering whether it includes HST or not is equally important both for your legal compliance as well as for your compliance from I would say, a CRA from a HST perspective. Okay. As much as you have all documented ways of ensuring client intake, you also want to ensure that there's the internal process to your legal firm to be doing certain things that build the discipline that's required for financial success or financial management success. Okay, so do include as part of your checklist the idea of a periodic or a well-documented, I would say, timeline for when you would generate an invoice in your firm. And this is not just for yourself. If you're a sole practitioner, then obviously you need to practice it. But if you're an owner of a law firm or a legal firm, and you have colleagues and assistants and others that collaborate on a file, then you obviously need a well-documented structure that outlines when to generate an invoice. Okay? Is it important that you do it on a monthly basis, so everybody dockets their time every day, but there's just one bill that's sent to the client? Or do we just generate it as and when it happens? For each and every docket, as and when you docket it, generate an invoice. So whether it's a single invoice a month or 25 different invoices in a month, you should be well prepared, and it should be well documented so that everyone in the firm is very much aware of that situation. Okay? Make it a process either for your accountant or your bookkeeper or your administrator, or if it's you who's doing all these roles, to often ensure that there's a checklist on an invoice balance. This is to make sure that you're recovering all the payments. This is really your accounts receivable report, which talks about who are those clients who haven't paid you yet, because this is critical from both a reconciliation standpoint as well as obviously a financial success as a business standpoint, right? Why would it, look into reconciliation if you've generated an invoice 45 days back, you haven't got paid, or maybe you've got paid, you've just not deposited that check that meant to be that payment into your bank. Well, then, if your check bounces or if it's too late to deposit, there's many things that can go wrong. So that's why you need to have a process and procedure to keep a tab on all of these things that happen. Okay? You're using trust money, ensuring that as soon as you've generated the invoice, someone in the firm, whether it's yourself or others in the firm that collaborate, are doing the necessary trust transfers, the eligible trust transfers. We've often come across clients in firms, both solo as well as medium-sized law firms, not necessarily depositing these trusts or doing these trust transfers, but reporting these trust transfers into a system or a bookkeeping software or legal accounting software or even an Excel sheet. It's equally important to do it in real life, but also record it and report it into a software or a process so that the history of that record keeping is well established and maintained. Because the system, the software, is what's going to generate the necessary reports that are required for you to be submitting during an audit process. Okay? So if you've got paid or if you've done that transfer, but if you've not told the software that you're using that you've done it, then there's a lot of catch-up that needs to be required, a lot of reconciliation work that needs to be done at the end of the month. Okay? So just do it as it when happens. Just follow the real-life transactions and record it into a software that you use. Whether you're using a software or you're using this manually, be aware of all the requirements in terms of financial documents, starting with your client's trust ledgers and journals, your trust receipts and disbursements, if you do plan to use trust disbursement. Are you maintaining trust comparisons and reconciliations? So are you doing the monthly reconciliation for all trust accounts? Do you have the necessary Form 9As for electronic fund transfers? So top 4 questions from a trust handling. Then if you look at a general account, ensure you're maintaining a general ledger, journal, which includes receipts, disbursements, expenses, fee book and expense book. Very important. Fee book is all the revenue that you've generated through invoices. Expense book talks about all the expenses that you've incurred as a business. Okay? And it also includes a record of all the discounts and write-offs that you may have provided. All that's important to balance the final profit that you as a business make. Okay? And last but not the least, a general reconciliation on your general accounts. Taxes. Again, if you are in the stage where you're accepting taxes, HST or the provincial taxes based on the jurisdiction that you're from today, ensure that you have a proper way of recording both taxes received and taxes paid. Okay? It's equally important that you have a process that's easy to follow or a software that's easy to use and can, by design, provide you these critical information that are necessary for those compliance documents. Okay, let me skip along. So we'll kind of get into the technology review. So we've looked at the practice review. So for those who've just joined us a little bit late, let me just do a quick recap of what we've covered so far. Okay, so we've looked at practice review, the documentation that's required right from client intake to matter and file management, the financial review, and I'll take about 5 minutes at the end of this session to walk you through all these compliance checklists inside of uLaw. The financial reviews, we just covered that. How do we ensure financial success by design? What are the documents that are required to be generated, right from ledgers to journals to Form 9As? And then we're going to move on now to the technology review. Okay? So going back to the technology review, the audit obviously wants to understand from your perspective as to how comfortable you are with regards to backup and security procedures, right? Whether it's a desktop system, whether it's a cloud-based system, are you asking all the right questions to your cloud provider? Is it 256-bit encrypted? Is it secure? Where is the data center? So is Canadian hosted, or is it hosted in the United States, somewhere else in Asia or Europe? Where is the data, resident? Talking about the security measures, if something were to happen, how often is the data backed up and recovered, and how easy is it to recover it? If you are doing this yourself, what process do you have to do that? If something were to happen, how can you recover all of your client information? Or if you don't have one, what do you plan to do if something like that were to happen? Okay? Again, preparing yourself for these types of questions and knowing that these are types of questions that will be asked as part of your audit just goes back to you being a more prepared legal professional from day one. So if you have answers to these questions, document them, have them available, and then when you're asked, you can provide them. How robust is your document management solution? Is it cloud-based? Is it desktop-based? The pros and cons of it, right? You want to really understand how easy it is to manage your documents. How easy is it to search for it? Do you have ability to provide accessibility points to your clients to touch these documents? And we spoke about the software security and high availability of these cloud-based solutions that with the advent of technology that you have exposure to today. Simple questions like antivirus software in your computer, the password protection that you have for your computers. If you're using mobile devices, how do you secure data across those devices as well? Do you, any indication of risk of using whatever technology that you're using? Do you have a way of communicating those risks or documenting those risks to your clients? And that's why we talk about retainer letters being a great example of a document where you can truly outline risks of communication, the types of technologies that you use, etc. Okay? And we're not touching specifically on the conduct reviews, but we certainly want to talk about time management, which is the fourth aspect of your audit process. We're covering more so from the top three aspects of the audit review, which is very much in preview of a legal accounting and practice management software. How can legal accounting and practice management software help you with those top three core components of an audit process, right? So starting with your practice management review, your financial management review, and a technology review. Now that you know what you should expect out of the documentations that you have to provide, the next question is it possible for me to make it easier on me to deliver these documentation? Or do I have to spend and burn my midnight oil to actually generate these documents on a regular basis? And we firmly believe that using a practice management software and a legal accounting software would help expedite the time, would help build that discipline and process across everyone in the firm, including, if it's just yourself, then that's great. Especially if it's a firm with more than 1-2 people, a software builds that discipline. Okay? If you can mandate the need to capture source of contact, you know that you cannot do a client intake without capturing that information, whether it's you or whether it's someone else in your firm, right? So that's where software helps right from that client intake process. Generating reports and documents, legal accounting software especially, gives you the flexibility of not only dealing with your practice management needs, your law society needs on one end, it in many ways also helps you with the CRA needs that from a business ownership standpoint too. Okay. Now what's required? And we talk about this often, and I like to reiterate that the whole concept of any software is the ability for you to record what really happened in real life. So a transaction happened in real life, the need to capture that, record that event, and if possible, doing it as and when it happens, so that then you're not waiting on your memory to go back in time to record it, right? So record it as and when it happens. So whether that's doing it initially on a notepad and then entering it into your software at the end of the day, or using a mobile app version of that product to enter it as and when it happens, it really comes down to your style, the choice of product that you have, etc. But having a discipline of recording events in time, as and when they happen, recording financial record keeping of financial records, bank records as close as possible through those, timely reconciliations. Those two by itself are, I would say, the top two reasons why you should consider using a legal accounting software, because it can certainly reduce the time and effort required to generate all of those documents and ledgers and journals that you otherwise have to provide, also providing you the ease of use and a mechanism to capture these events as and when they happen. Okay? And if it's all about, four things, right? And these are the four things that you want to consider when considering a software. Compliance, as a legal professional, there's no way you can get around this. So that's the software that you will look to explore. Have the compliance capabilities to provide you with documents that are in line with the compliance needs. How accountable is it? How easy is it to use? So does it really help you track your business expenses? Does it help you track all of your business transactions? And end of the day, does it save you time and money? Also, does it give you the opportunity to assess the health of your business so that then you can take proactive measures to improve your business and have a target or a focus towards a target to achieve, right? You'd really need to measure your monthly, quarterly, and yearly progress as a business as well. So you could be a great compliant legal professional, but if you can be a great compliant legal professional who's successful and profitable in his or her business, I think that's the ideal state that we're all looking to achieve. So then comes the options of you have to do all of these. You can do this manually if you have the time. If you're just doing one or a few files a year, then you definitely have the time, but you still need to have a checklist and a process to do it manually. Or if you are a busy professional who can afford a software, and cloud software these days are very economical, but they're not very expensive. It's not a very heavy-ended investment. It's maybe $1 a day or less than a coffee a day for cloud-based software. So can you do it without, any additional assistance? That's the last thing to ask is, despite me doing all of this, do I still need to end up having to work with a bookkeeper? Do I need an assistant? Do I need someone to do all the data entry for me? Do I need a specialized individual to help me beyond what I do? So if a legal software can actually afford to do all of those for you, then most certainly it does not hurt to explore it and maximize the use of it so that it's going to benefit you. Now, with another 9 minutes left in to kind of wrap up today's presentation, hopefully leaving some time for Q&A, we found all these individual references that are online very, very meaningful and something that you should certainly use as a reading pleasure. So spot audits, really Law Society of Ontario talks a lot about spot audits, the need for it, what is used, what questions are asked, how long does the spot audit take, what happens after a spot audit. So it's a really good read for you to look at. Audit checklist. So I'm going to show you that in a brief moment. But there's a defined checklist of things to consider for every audit. There's a FAQ, frequently asked questions about audit rules and policies. And there's obviously the full-fledged bookkeeping guidelines documentation that really talks about how the law societies require you to document and showcase certain information in certain templatized ways. Okay? So what I mentioned early on is uLaw, again, this by no means is a way of showcasing the product, but to showcase that a legal accounting software gives you the strong capability of doing all of this by design from day one. Okay? Whether it's client intake, whether it's file management, whether it's financial management, or the necessary technology aspects of security, safeguarding, backup, recovery, legal accounting softwares do provide you with that additional ease of use and flexibility that you can afford, which otherwise you have to do it in a bit of a manual way. In the case of uLaw, if you look at it, the product itself was designed based on bookkeeping guidelines, but one step further that we've taken towards this compliance, when we're very adamant that our clients be in a very happy la-la land, but at the same time be very compliant and have fun doing it. Right? So that's our goal. We want to educate all our customers as well. If you look at we have a full-fledged audit guide that really talks about each step that you would have to take, the types of checklists that you have to maintain to be audit ready, a compliance guide that talks about how you, by design, the firm can actually be compliant ready at any time, and the steps that the firm can take to do so. And at each and every touch point, whether it's a client intake, so in the case of contacts, which is really the ability for you to do a client intake, you obviously are able to generate all the necessary compliance documents, pretty much a click of a button. So you've got this compliance panel, whether it's conflict screening reports, whether it's the fee book, source of contact. If you look at a source of contact document, which is traditionally a quarterly or sometimes maybe a yearly touch point, so let's do it for quarter. Source of contact is an easy way for you to showcase two things. One, for your marketing team or for yourself to know what marketing strategy is working to fetch you the necessary customers and leads that you need to work on. So it really tells you at client intake how that client got to know you as the legal professional. Oops, sorry, my bad. It's an internet thing. Okay. If we were to move into file management, which is the second component of the practice management components, then you start to look at key components of compliance well within the file management. So let's say you have done your conflict screening, and then you've opened up the file, then reporting the conflict screening reporting capabilities, talking about all the necessary conflict screening reports, retainer documents. Give me a second. I'm going to make sure I've connected to the internet right. Okay. There you go. I do apologize for that. I think there's a bit of a disconnect from the internet. So if you look at a compliance from a file management or matter management, it really talks about client intake, verification, so ensuring that you've got the person's driver's license or whatever the documentation may be to ensure that the client is the client that he or she claims to be. Client intake form, you've got a conflict screening documentation that really helps you outline why you determined this client to not be a conflict. Okay. So all these documents that are required through the life cycle of that law firm's or legal firm's review process is all available to you in the click of a button, literally. So let's go back to maybe the conflict screening report. So we're talking about the file management component of the review. Let me revisit the source of contact report, which is part of the initial client intake process as part of the practice management, right? Here's a great example of the conflict screening report, which really talks about, okay, so Mr. Roger Moore, you've got this new client, Alexander, out of Ottawa, right? You've got all the information, really talking about all the conflict search that you've done, all pre-populated, right? Obviously, this is a client with a lot of conflict. You can go ahead, even if you were to non-engage this client at this time, you can always say possible conflicts or conflicts confirmed, and you can say, I'm not going to take this client. Right? Very important step to be able to do so. The source of referral or contact referral, right? Talks about where you're getting your clients from. Advertisement, LinkedIn, Facebook, Law Society referrals from friends. This is a great marketing tool, but also is a report that's asked by auditors just to understand where clients are coming from. Or are you just a referral source for legal work, or are you an actual practicing legal practitioner, right? From a financial standpoint, a lot of the accounting information that's in existence, the core aspects, again, under compliance, are very well documented in uLaw, right from your ledgers to journals to your trust reconciliations, general reconciliations. So at a click of a button, Client's Trust, you pretty much can generate the monthly reconciliation statement, or sorry, in this case, the trust ledger for the month of June. Okay, so just go ahead and hit monthly, and that's going to generate a trust ledger well formatted to be defined as the Law Society requires you to define it. What are the guidelines that the Law Society talks about? All the information that needs to be in this document. The date that each transaction occurred. The particulars of what really occurred in that transaction. Whether was it a receipt or was it an invoice disbursement. What's the outstanding balance in trust as of that date. That's the information that they want per each client in that month. Okay? So all that's provided, generating these ledgers and journals are pretty much a breeze in the legal accounting software. Same thing with general ledgers, trust receipts, general receipts, trust payments. So this is the subset of all the required documents that are more specifically tuned towards compliance. Okay? A superset is where you can find under reports, like a balance sheet, trial balance. That's all part of your need for a business compliance. So from a legal compliance standpoint, you pretty much have all that under the compliance panel. And from a technology review standpoint, whether it's uLaw or any other software, it should be in the terms of use, policy, procedure, documentation that truly talks about the security measures that go back to your technology review. So how often do we back up? What's our disaster recovery? So we are obviously a 256-bit encrypted. Our data is very much in Canada. So that and we have a two-factor authentication, a strong password. We don't allow for easy passwords to be used in uLaw. So those are the types of questions that you want to ask your provider. Get all that answered and make it as part of that technology review procedural document. So when asked by your auditor, you can basically say, I did my due diligence. I spoke to a bunch of product companies. I chose this product because they were convincing enough that they provided me all the relevant information to make that decision, and here's that information. Okay. So going back to our core presentation of what we wanted to talk about in today's session was about getting ready for Law Society audits, knowing what's being asked in that audit, having a design to be ready for that audit from day one, and looking at the 4 major areas that you're going to be asked questions around: practice, financial, technology, and obviously from a professional conduct. How do you conduct yourself as a true professional? Those are things that they're going to ask you as well. Okay, we spoke about the surveys, maybe serving your clients, your individual employees, if it's a firm, about how you're being treated in the firm, right? All that adds up to those professional conducts. And then we broke down each and every component and the documentation that's required, and how you, as a legal professional, can manage a checklist or leave it for a product to manage that checklist for you as part of its DNA, so that you're audit ready from day one. Okay? So that being said, I'll kind of wrap up today's webinar as it's that time of the day to close out the webinar, and I'll open the floor for any questions that you may have with regards to this webinar. And once again, this session will be available and recorded and will be available for consumption on our YouTube channel as early as Monday evening. And do kindly request you to use the links provided or send us an email notifying that you've joined us in today's webinar. And you can actually go to our Law Society portal to report the 1 hour of professionalism credits for today's CPD. Okay? And I'll open the floor for any questions that you may have for me or my support staff. For claiming the CPD hours, so if you're a professional from Ontario, you would log into your Law Society of Ontario portal. I'm sure you're aware of your username and password, and you would search for the subject, Getting Ready for a Law Society Audit. Okay? Or you can mention this exact title of today's CPD session, Getting Ready for Law Society Audit, and report that you attended this session. Okay? And then this session gives you the 1 hour of CPD. Now, in addition, if you can kindly email us to support@uLawPractice.com that you did attend today's session, if we're being asked by the Law Society or we're being audited, if you truly did attend, then we would have that record as well. In terms of PDF download, I'm not quite sure if the question is regarding a checklist or whether it's regarding the presentation itself. We can make this entire slide share available as a PDF if that's what the question is. Yep, we will make that available. It's actually available on our, I want to say on our document management system as well, but that's a good question. We'll definitely make that available and email it. If you can email us that you participated in today's session, we'll respond back with the PDF version of it. The question about just typing the email. There's a question about the sample checklist. So going back to, you go to our help under two things, audit guide. We talk about the Law Society audit checklist. Pretty much has this is a PDF that you can download or you can print, right? So it talks pretty much everything that we've covered today. So what is the audit, why me, the financial review, the practice review. It also gives you this little checklist that you can consider. What is it for, right? It's a pretty detailed documentation in a PDF format. So if you look at checklist, under practice management, here's a simple checklist for client service and communication, matter management and internal procedures. Here's a financial management checklist, a client management checklist, right? So I hope this answers this question. This pretty much has a checklist that you should consider. I would also encourage you to look at our compliance guide that, again, as I mentioned, really talks about the key components that you need to cover on a timely basis. So what are the different daily, weekly, quarterly, and yearly checklists that you need to have? So on a weekly basis, review your bank transactions in your trust and general accounts. Ensure that all transactions are entered into, the appropriate legal accounting software. And that's important too, right? And then from a monthly or activity compliance checklist, reconciliations, ensuring that you've done your HST or GST, PST based on your jurisdiction, calculating all the taxes, generating all the Form 9As. So this is a pretty exhaustive. These two documents by themselves provide you all the information you need of what you need to cover within an audit. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, once again, thank everyone who's joined me today for the session. I sincerely hope this was your time well spent and an informational session. We do encourage you to provide us feedback on these CPDs. We're continuing to improve on it and looking to bring newer topics to cover to keep those CPDs more engaging. And we welcome feedback, and we'd love to hear back from you. And for everyone who did vote us in our recent survey, we thank you. And have yourself a fantastic long weekend. And we'll see you in our next webinar next week. Thank you very much.